Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and once again, the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events. We cover over 19 different promotions from all over the world, and we are slowly approaching that 5,000 fighter profile mark to ensure you have as many direct links as possible for all these fighters. Again, it is your one-stop shop if you enjoy studying. Now, this weekend, we only have the UFC card, but there's also an ACA 184 card going down. Not as much action as we had this past weekend, but the following weekend in March, things really start to pick up, especially as Cage Warriors starts to get into the mix and they start their 2025 schedule as well. So we got over 110 subscribers on the service. You can try it out for free with a 7-day free trial. Link in the description. Again, if you enjoy predicting and breaking down and watching fights yourself and coming to your own conclusions, the MMA Fight Archive is your one-stop shop. Check the link in the description below. All right, this week we're going to be talking about UFC Vegas 103 with a flyweight headliner between Manel Kape and Almabayev, who's actually stepping in on somewhat short notice for the injured Brandon Royval. And then in the co-main event, very weird placement for this, but considering the chaotic nature that these guys bring to the table, middleweights Cody Brundage and Julian Marquez are going to be throwing down in the co-main event. There are some fun fights. I know the Apex card is usually not the greatest in terms of name value and just, having fights throughout the card that are great, but this card has some sneaky bangers, and even though I don't agree with the belt placement for a lot of them, it should be a fun time and a good card to carry us over into the big UFC 313 going down on March 8th. Now let's get into the recaps for the Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night plays. And I got to be honest, guys, it's been a shitty first 2 months of action for your boy. I'm not doing too well in terms of, turning a profit or anything like that. We're in the deficit here. This past weekend, we went 1-3 on the events that I was capping. LFA, we swept the board. Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night hit with no issue. For the UFC, well, I'll talk about that in a second here. KSW, horrible outside of one underdog shot that I hit, and then got reverse swept on OKTAGON. It wasn't my night. I had some bad split decisions go the other way. I had some weird circumstances where there was even a guy that had dominant position, ends up getting reversed and arm triangle choked at the exact same time. What the hell? And then another one where my guy dropped the other guy and then ends up getting up kicked in the face and ends up getting finished after that. So very weird circumstances, and that's just a volatile sport of MMA. But I'm hoping to just stay the course, slowly dig myself out of this hole, and try to turn 2025 into a profit, just as we've been able to do over the last couple of years. So stay in the course. So let's talk about the Lock of the Night for this past weekend at UFC Seattle. We went with Javid Basharat. I got him in at minus 250, a ton of action against him a couple of days later. He ends up closing closer to minus 230, minus 240, and he was looking good until he got his head sent into orbit by Ricky Simone. And Simone, we know he has big power, but I was assuming with Basharat's striking background and his ability to maintain his distance and never being knocked out in the past, I thought he'd be able to stick Simone from distance and just stick to his game. But one shot, the volatility of MMA, and that's what ends up happening. So we have to rip up our ticket there. We only ended up hitting one of our 4 Lock of the Night plays this past weekend. Again, one of them was a split decision loss in the OKTAGON main event. The KSW, horrible game planning by a long, lanky striker who decided to throw in the pocket a little bit longer than he should have against a slugger. And then the LFA one hits for us with relative ease as Elias Rodriguez finishes his opponent, Peter Lucet, I believe in the second round of that matchup. So again, horrible weekend for the Lock of the Night plays. Now that brings our record for the Lock of the Night plays to 6-7 on the year for a 46% hit rate through 2 months. Yuck. I'm not going to try to defend myself too much there. Horrible showcasing. Again, volatility of MMA, it is what it is, but that is not the goal with the Lock of the Night play. We're trying to aim for a 50-unit goal for this year. We still got 10 months to go, but I still got a lot of work to do in terms of righting the wrongs there. So I'm to blame. I'll take this one on the chin. Bad picks on my end. We'll try to tighten the gears here. Dog of the night is another case. Now we're 7-7 on the year. We go 2-2 this past weekend on Dog of the Night plays. If I'm hitting 50% of my underdogs, I am happy. We are in a solid profit for the Dog of the Night play. Very happy with that. This past weekend, I believe it was who was Ivan Kutelaba plus 153 over Ibo Aslan. They got a little bit sluggish at first, but Kutelaba eventually gets to his wrestling and gets that fight to the ground and has great success there. So I'm able to cash the underdog there. Cash the over 2.5 on the Sierra Dinwoody and Nicole Aguirre fight on LFA. That cashes our underdog of the night there, the dog of the night for that. And then for KSW and OKTAGON, we don't end up hitting those underdogs there. So again, 2-2 on the weekend in the profit for dog of the night plays, but it's the lock of the night that I really need to just tighten the screws on and just get my shit together there. So no chasing. We're going to stay the course, stick with my confidence and see where it ends up taking us. But we got some work to do for the last 10 months of the year. All right. I'm only covering the UFC this weekend, so you can find all the tracked plays, all the good stuff, all the degenerate parlays, all of that good stuff on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Check the link in the description below if you want for that. Again, kind of hard to really sell off the Patreon page after such a horrible weekend, but gonna plug it nonetheless because I do appreciate everybody sticking with your boy through thick and thin. I do also want to plug GodzillawIns.com, where I'm able to plug my main event breakdown on Thursdays and 3 best money line spots on Fridays. The money line spots did well. We go 2-1 with our 2 underdogs, Iwan Kutelaba and Austin Vanderford hitting for us. And then I took a long shot on Eric McConaughey. That didn't end up coming through, but that ended up being profitable. So just shout out to anybody that was on the GodzillawIns.com. And not just for MMA, we got you guys covered on all other sports. Great panelist of writers, predictors, handicappers, all that good stuff. Check out GodzillawIns.com. All right. Without further ado, I believe we got 12 fights scheduled for this UFC Vegas 103 card. Oh, last thing. It's Sunday. I'm dropping this on Sunday. That is my goal moving forward. Sunday full card breakdowns. That allows me to drop one video each day of fight week, including the Sunday, the day after a UFC event. Full card breakdown on Sundays. Top 3 lock of the night play candidates on Mondays. Tuesdays going to be chalk or not. Wednesdays going to be quick picks. Thursdays going to be Locky 2-step / Locky Trinity free parlay. And Fridays will be the prop drop. So I want to spread it out a little bit more rather than having more than one video drop on one day. And what better way to actually push the MMA Lotcast to Sundays? I will try to stick with a firm time. As of right now, it looks like it'll release probably 6 p.m., 7 p.m. Eastern on Sundays, but I want to try to get a little bit earlier. So with only one event next week, hopefully I can get ahead of schedule enough that we can release maybe 3 p.m. Eastern every Sunday, full card breakdown, something for you guys to look forward to the day after a UFC event so we can get started on the following week. So lock in. We're getting serious with this shit in terms of dropping on Sundays for you guys. So hopefully you guys appreciate that. All right. Like I said, 12 fights to break down for this UFC Vegas 103 card. Without further ado, let's get right into this thing. We end the night at flyweight. So we're going to start the night at flyweight as well with a banger of a matchup that should be the co-main event. We got Charles Johnson coming in at plus 105 going up against Ramazan Temirov, who comes in at minus 125. Now starting off on the Johnson side of things, who's riding a solid 4-fight winning streak on the back end of a 3-fight losing streak that he was on back in 2023. It seems like he's gotten his confidence back, but I think the big part of in his success has been his confidence with his output and his volume. That's what made him so successful on the LFA scene, and that's why he ended up making it to the UFC in the first place. But for some reason, he started to muzzle himself and really allowed his opponents to dictate the pace. But now in his last 4 fights, he's the one snatching the command and snatching the pace, allowing him to go out there and land with volume, output, solid counters, and utilizing that Muay Thai approach to really shut his opponents down. Last time against Sumadarji, he had a minor slip up in the at the ending of the second round, but luckily still won that round because Sumadarji ended up winning the third round in that matchup. But we still saw Johnson end up getting his hand raised by unanimous decision. Before that, nasty knockout victory over Joshua Van in a very competitive matchup, but it goes to show what kind of potential Charles Johnson has. He's 34 years old, and if he hopes to get too close to a title shot, he needs to keep this winning streak going. But the UFC is giving him no favors, considering they continue to sidestep him and not allow him to progress up the rankings, especially with him having to go up against a nasty 18-2 prospect who's only in his second UFC fight. Now, Ramazan Temirov made a nasty UFC debut back in October where he put out CJ Vergara in the first round of their matchup. Temirov is a very solid fighter with, I believe, the majority of his wins coming by knockout. I believe 13 of his 18 wins are now by finish, and he's done a great job in terms of utilizing his style effectively to, one, get to the UFC, but also be successful in his UFC debut. This is a guy that utilizes a ton of lateral movement, a lot of footwork, and cuts those angles well so that he can crash the pocket, blitz his opponents, and land his combinations, most often putting his opponents out, or at least landing enough damage that the judges end up scoring fights in his favor. Now, the last loss on his record is a fight that he actually ended up avenging a few fights later, and that's a part of the 10-fight winning streak that he currently finds himself on. Turning 29 just about a month ago, this guy, very solid prospect, I believe. Oh, sorry, he turned 28 the other month. Very solid prospect, a kid that has a ton of potential that could potentially find himself as a flyweight contender, but he's going to have to get past a very tricky Charles Johnson here. And going into this, I really expected to be on the Johnson side, but seeing the footwork and the angles that Temirov is able to cut, I do expect him to eventually land those big shots on Johnson, and if he's not able to knock him out, at least land the more eye-catching shots that the judges are eventually going to score in his favor. Johnson might be able to land some good counters down the pipe and try to stick Temirov from distance, but I think this is going to be one of those cases where the bigger shots, even if they're less in quantity, the quality of those shots may end up weighing more on the judges' minds rather than the picking apart that Johnson may be looking to do here. But I ultimately think Temirov lands that big blow. That's going to put Johnson down and out. So I'm going to go Temirov here, and Temirov by knockout. And normally I don't like fading veterans of the UFC, especially guys with a solid strength of schedule, but this Temirov kid looks like he's the goods, and I think he comes through with a knockout victory. All right, next up in the women's flyweight division, we got Montana De La Rosa coming in at plus 120, going up against Luana Carolina, who comes in at minus 140. Now, starting off on the De La Rosa side, she successfully avoided a 4-fight losing streak last time around as she was able to get the split decision win over Andrea Lee. Now, it's clear what De La Rosa is best at: getting opponents to the ground and asserting her wrestling pressure to really do damage from that top position, or either sink in a submission and try to get the tap as well. She's tried to work on her striking, but it doesn't seem to be coming to fruition, but she needs to utilize it enough to mask the takedowns that are inevitably coming her opponent's way so that she can still be successful. She's 30 years old, and I don't want to say she's going to be a complete slouch in the grappling or the striking realm, as we've seen in recent fights, but there is not a whole lot of confidence that she can instill in us that she's going to become a good enough striker to catch up to the wrestling skills that she brings to the table. She's very solid. She owns her own gym with her husband, who's a former UFC flyweight as well, Mark De La Rosa. And I think she's good enough to stick around that top 20 to top 15 range, especially with the wrestling that she brings to the cage. Now, she's going up against Luana Carolina, who's on a 3-fight winning streak and has been a fighter that I have historically been very low on. But I have to give her her credit, considering that she makes the improvements that she's been making, but also going on this 3-fight winning streak and shutting down the grappling that her opponents are trying to put her through. Obviously, her striking and her Muay Thai kickboxing is where she feels most comfortable, throwing at range, throwing combinations and landing head kicks. And again, she's showing a bit of urgency in her fights, which allow her to get these decision wins, even in fights that might seem a little bit closer than the scorecards indicate. She's better than I gave her credit for, but I think this is going to be a true test for her, especially if she wants to distance herself from, the unranked fighters and trying to get into that top 10 of the division. Montana probably has the best wrestling outside of the top 15, and I think that if she can't implement her wrestling here against Carolina, she's going to be in some big trouble. But I do find myself on the De La Rosa side ever so slightly. I think a lot of that has to do with me not being fully sold on Carolina's defensive grappling improvements. Sure, she's shown it against fighters like Ivana Petrovic and Lucy Pudilova, but De La Rosa, when she's able to establish that top position, is a lot tougher to deal with than those past two opponents that I just mentioned. Thus, I end up leaning ever so slightly to the De La Rosa side. On the feet, for sure, Carolina should be able to touch her up and have major success there, but she's not a huge knockout threat, and I think that will play into De La Rosa's favor, who largely showcases solid durability and a willingness to accept some damage so that she can get to a grappling and find some success there. I'm going to go De La Rosa here. I think she wins this fight on the scorecards, and I don't mind a little nibble on her as an underdog. All right, we got a featherweight banger here between Danny Silva, who comes in at minus 185, going up against Lucas Almeida, who comes in at plus 160. Now, Danny Silva was successful in his UFC debut last time around, outpointing Joshua Culibao in a very close fight, but I thought it was evident that Silva was pulling away late. That second round, a bit of a toss-up, but that third round, it was clear that he was starting to pull away. This is a pupil of Cub Swanson, a training partner of guys like Rafa Garcia. I always want to make R's H's for some reason, but Rafa Garcia or Juan Archuleta as well. And he's been coming up with these guys, and you can see that experience showing in some of his fights. His lone professional defeat came at the hands of former Dana White Contender Series competitor Kanan Kawai, who was able to nullify him on the mat and have good success through the first two rounds of that matchup before Danny Silva was coming on strong in the third, but it was a little bit too late for him at that point to end up getting his hand raised. He is on a 3-fight winning streak ever since, obviously, which includes his Contender Series winning performance that earned him that UFC contract against Angel Pacheco, and then obviously that aforementioned Joshua Culibao fight. He's a great striker, great boxing, good 1-2s down the pipe. He's really working on his Vale Tudo as well, which I'm not sure if it's going to have a huge impact on his MMA performances as he continues to take steps up in competition, but still a fighter who does his best work with his hands and is still trying to improve the grappling aspects of his game. His opponent, Lucas Almeida, came off of a upset victory over Timothy Kwamba last time around as he battered him over the course of the first 10 minutes, but then started to fall off with his efficiency in the third, but luckily he still did enough work in those first two rounds to get his hand raised on the scorecards. That helped him avoid a 3-fight losing streak as he had losses to Pat Sabatini and Andre Fili before that Kwamba fight, and I think he really needs to tie together here if he wants to hold on to this UFC roster spot. This is a guy that has nasty Muay Thai, throws with solid power, finds those 1-2s down the pipe, and does a great job in terms of countering his opponents and using straight shots down the pipe to really hurt those guys and either put them away or make it look good enough for the judges for that round to be scored in his favor. Just like Danny Silva, grappling has kind of been the downfall in his career. But I think in this matchup, I think we're going to see both guys look to utilize a striking approach and try to show off their ego a little bit that they are the better striker of the two. Now, I have to lean ever so slightly with the Brazilian here, not just because he's the underdog. Even if this fight was at a pick'em, I would probably lean with Almeida, as I think he has a little bit more sting on his shots. Even though Danny Silva has 5 knockout wins out of his 9 victories, 4 of those actually came in his first 4 fights of his career against low-level competition. And as he started fighting more difficult competition, those finishes have been harder to come by. The last knockout victory that he had under the LFA banner was against a guy that took the fight on less than 24 hours notice. So don't let the record of that guy make you believe that, Danny Silva showed out that fight. Of course he showed out, but the cards were definitely stacked in his favor in that matchup. For here with Almeida, he is more dangerous of a finisher, a guy that can definitely make Danny Silva pay for some of the moments where we see him hanging a little bit too long in the pocket, and I think Almeida will punish him in those spots. Thus, I'm going to go with Almeida by decision here. I think he lands more effective blows. I wouldn't fully count out a possible finish for Almeida, but I think ultimately he wins this fight on the scorecards, and he could be a damn good underdog to boot as well. All right, next up, going back to the women's flyweight division, We have probably the worst losing streak in the UFC currently, with Andrea Lee looking to buck a 5-fight losing streak, coming in as a plus 160 dog. She goes up against JJ Aldrich, who's looking to bounce back from a loss to Veronica Hardy. Now, I'll start off on the Andrea Lee side of things. She's 36 years old now. She is really not fleshing out to be that fighter that a lot of people expected her to be when she came over from the Invicta FC roster. She had some good performances. She's been able to pick up a bit of steam, but then she gets completely fizzled out and goes on extended losing streaks, just as we see her currently on right now. But credit to her in terms of, taking on the opponents that she has been during those first 4 losses out of those 5 fights. Viviane Araujo, Macy Barber, Natalia Silva, Miranda Maverick, all fighters that were able to put her in bad positions and have solid success against her. Usually she is great with her kickboxing. She has an aggressive guard and does a good job in terms of throwing up submissions and trying to create scrambles. But when she is fighting good enough grapplers, they're able to keep her on her back and kind of break her and frustrate her. We really see her start to slow down and break and get overly frustrated, allowing late rounds to slip away from her, especially when she can't find much success to the first 2 rounds of her fights. She's going up against JJ Aldrich, who's been inconsistent. She was on a 2-fight winning streak and then had that halted by Veronica Hardy, who utilized a great mobile striking game, kicking her from distance. And we finally saw Aldrich having success in the 3rd round of that matchup. But it was too little too late by that time, right? Aldrich is not a big finishing threat. She was obviously able to finish Na Liang because we know Na Liang's style. She slows down tremendously after the first 6 minutes, and that allowed Aldrich to muster up the finish there. But often we see Aldrich utilizing her boxing, walking her opponents down, putting combinations on them, and then winning fights on scorecards by landing more damaging blows. And I'm expecting that to pay off once again for her here as she goes against Andrea Lee. Lee might have a little bit more diverse set of skills in terms of her the Muay Thai, the kickboxing that she brings to the table. But I think that Aldrich is going to be able to thwart that, landing those combinations down the pipe, thwarting any type of grappling attempt Lee might try to implement here. I think Aldrich has good enough defensive grappling to shut that down. And then I think we'll see just a classic JJ Aldrich performance, touching up Andrea Lee, maybe making it a little bit closer than the odds suggest. But I think once the decision is read, it should firmly read that Aldrich ends up winning this matchup, outstriking Andrea Lee and winning it on the scorecards. All right, next up, bantamweights going at it here as we have Douglas Silva de Andrade coming in at plus 195, going up against John Castaneda, who comes in at minus 230. Now, I'll start off on the de Andrade side of things, who's coming off of a loss to Miles Johns last time around. And it was a somewhat close fight until the 3rd round where de Andrade was able to turn it up a little bit, but he was getting chipped away at and touched up by Johns through the first 2 rounds, which ultimately saw him lose that fight on the scorecards. De Andrade showed in the Cody Stamann fight prior to the loss to Miles Johns that he still has it, that he can still make fights competitive because of the explosivity and power in which he lands with if he's able to find the chin of his opponents, or at least land cleanly enough that the judges would score those rounds in his favor. He's just a ball of energy, and you can tell just by how muscle bound this guy is. And even at 39 years old, I believe he is very close to his 40th birthday as well, if I'm not mistaken. But still a guy that wants to go out there, showcase that he can be a pest to a lot of these guys in the top 15, top 10 range. But I don't think we're ever going to see him try to make that march towards a UFC title shot again. He's, or not again, but even close to getting title contention. He's been around in the UFC for a very long time. Since 2017, he's been very inconsistent, 5-5 over those 10 fights. Throws with a lot of power, nasty kicks, an aggressive grappling or defensive grappling game if he can create scrambles, but he can be grinded out and touched up and outpointed by most opponents. Now, he's going up against John Castaneda, who had no answers for the problems that Daniel Marcos was presenting to him last time around, as Marcos was able to touch him up, counter him effectively, and utilize his leg kick to really slow Castaneda down. Castaneda normally does a great job in terms of utilizing lateral movement, blitzing his opponents, landing some combinations, maybe even mixing in some takedowns to have some success, but he is a middling bantamweight as well that doesn't really do much to pop off the page. He had a 2-fight winning streak, even has a win over Miles Johns where he was able to submit him, but then obviously losses to Daniel Santos and Daniel Marcos, guys that usually provide him problems, guys that are able to consistently counter him or push him and put him into some compromising positions. I'm kind of, I'm not over the moon in terms of the minus 230 line on Castaneda. Again, the Andrade can really find ways to spring upsets by landing power and just kind of taking command of fights. But I think he's going to struggle to do that here against Castaneda as Castaneda continues to work, utilizing that movement, maybe mixing in some takedowns, but landing some combinations and really frustrating the Andrade and start running away later on with this matchup. So I'm going to go Castaneda here. Castaneda by decision. He's taken a little bit of action over the last 24 hours, but I do still like him to win this matchup, but not too heavy on his chalky minus 230 line. Next up, featherweights going at it here as we have Ricardo Ramos coming in at plus 375, going up against Kape Mariscal, who comes in at minus 475. Now, starting off on the Ricardo Ramos side, he was able to win his last matchup by the skin of his teeth against Josh Culibao in a fight where he seemed dead to rights in that second round, with Culibao absolutely chewing up that lead leg of Ramos. But unfortunately, there were moments in the first and third round where Ramos was able to get the back of Culibao and accrue solid control time, threatened with some submissions, and that was enough for two judges to score that fight in his favor. I thought Culibao lost that fight more than Ramos actually won it, if you guys know what I mean there. But Ramos is really not turning into that prospect that a lot of people expected of him when he made his UFC debut a couple years back. Now he's obviously 2-3 over his last 5 fights and showcasing kind of the ceiling that he has at this point. He's a BJJ black belt, so to see him get guillotined by guys like Charles Jourdain and Julian Rosa was a little bit puzzling to me, but it just goes to show that he might have some issues in his game that he might not be able to overcome, especially when guys are very aggressive grapplers. He's very flashy with his striking, but his durability has been a big issue in his career as well. He used to train out of Team Alpha Male, but it seems like he's hooked up with the guys down there at the Fighting Nerds who are absolutely streaking right now, and I wonder if they'll be able to change his career around. I'm just not fully sold on that. He has a very tough opponent to try to do it against here, and Kape Mariscal, who's done a great job in terms of putting a solid winning streak together. Obviously undefeated in the UFC thus far, going 4-0, putting on fantastic matchups every single time out. And last time we saw him go out there and pretty much sweep Damon Jackson on the scorecards, out grappling him and staying a step ahead the entire time. Mariscal is a guy that took 19 fights to make it to the UFC and has fought a high level talent on the regional scene, which is why I believe he was ready to make the jump to the UFC when he finally got the call up. He finds himself on a 7-fight winning streak with 4 of those coming inside the UFC, and he's also been a guy that's all the losses on his record, 6 of his losses have come against very high-level opponents on the regional scene. 5 guys that eventually actually made it to the UFC as well. High pace, high pressure, improving striking, high-level grappling, insane scrambling ability, and a very good gas tank. Kape Mariscal is a thorn in the side of a lot of these featherweights, and I think he'll showcase that once again here against Ricardo Ramos. He might be able to pick it up late and maybe get a finish against Ramos, but I think we see Mariscal utilize his grappling, keep Ramos in compromising positions, and grind this fight out and win it on the scorecards. Taking a lot of action as well over the last 24 hours, going from minus 400 to minus 475, and I think that is warranted here as he is the better fighter and just momentum clearly on his side. All right, moving over to the welterweight division now. We got Danny Barlow coming in at minus 350, going up against Sam Patterson, who comes in at plus 285. Now, we'll start off on the Barlow side of things, who was able to keep his undefeated record intact last time around, going 2-0 in the UFC and 9-0 overall by winning a very close fight against Nikolai Veretennikov. Now, that's a matchup where I had him as a lock of the night play, and I did have him as a lock of the night play against Josh Quinlan, but I think that fight against Veretennikov played up much closer than a lot of people expected. I think that was kind of an off night for Barlow, who is usually a very consistent and effective southpaw fighter who utilizes a very nasty left straight down the pipe that often puts his opponents away. The majority of his wins have come by knockout, and that just goes to show what kind of power he possesses. And he doesn't often chase the knockouts. He just does a great job in terms of utilizing that left hand and showcasing the speed and power in which he's able to land it. I wish he would use his jab a little bit more, because that would help him set up the left hand down the pipe and not throwing it naked so often. But he's 9-0. Who am I to say that, he should change something up? If it's not broke, don't fix it, kind of thing, right? So, and the other part of Barlow's game that not a lot of people have seen is that he has wrestling in his back pocket. Right? This is a guy that has that wrestling background, not a super high level wrestling background, but he has it should he need it. But considering the amount of success we often see him have with his hands, why go that route when you've been knocking fools out left and right? I was going up against Sam Patterson, who finally has his confidence back about him, riding a 2-fight winning streak, both of those wins coming via first round submission. The first over Johan Lainez and the last over Kiefer Crosby. That's on the back end of that nasty knockout loss that he suffered at the hands of Yanal Ashmuz back in March of 2023, where he got put out cold. Probably one of the nastiest knockouts we've ever seen. He took the appropriate time off, came back strong, and has showcased the type of potential that he can have if he's really on his game. He's long, lanky, 6'3" with a 78-inch reach, often utilizing that to utilize his striking from distance, his long-range weapons, his kicks, his 1-2s down the pipe. But he's also a BJJ black belt, and it seems that's something he's starting to lean on a little bit more so he can go out there and strangle his opponents. In the past, he's often used it defensively because opponents want to get away from his striking, so they look to take him down, and from there, he's able to snatch their necks up and force them to tap or put them to sleep. Now, I believe Patterson has good potential and has a high ceiling, but I think he's really up against it here with the speed and power that he's facing with Barlow. I think Patterson will struggle to get this fight into the grappling realm, which will force him to strike with Barlow, who I think should be able to land counters effectively here and eventually put Patterson away by knockout. I don't mind the chalk on him. People might be a little bit lower on Barlow this time around because of how close his last fight was, but I can expect him to land early and often on Patterson, eventually putting him away within 2 rounds. All right, featherweights throwing down here. Very fun matchup here between undefeated Haider Amil coming in at plus 170, going up against William Gomis, who comes in at minus 200. Now, Haider Amil is riding a solid 10-fight winning streak. Obviously, all 10 of his fights are victories, and 2 of those have come inside the UFC. The last one, very, very fun fight. 65 seconds of action against the Korean Tiger, Jung Young Lee, in a matchup where he put the pressure on him immediately and eventually found the knockout. Amil is an all-gas, no-breaks kind of fighter, often utilizing his grappling to put his opponents through the ringer, wear them out, and eventually open up submission or TKO opportunities once he has broken them. I wish he was just a tad bit younger when he came into the UFC, but started his career a little bit later than usual. He's 34 years old right now. He'll be 35 in May. He's a pupil of Gilbert Melendez, who has been building this guy up for a long time now. So to finally see him in the UFC and having success already goes to show what kind of potential he could have. He just really needs to get on it and stay active enough so that he can get closer to title contention before his age starts to catch up to him. Striking could use a little bit of work, but his durability is ironclad. He does a great job in terms of rolling with shots, eventually getting fights into the grappling realm, and scrambling so well that opponents are not able to keep up with him. Now he's going up against William Gomis, who I've kind of been low on throughout his career, but the kid's on a solid winning streak right now, making a very difficult 12-fight winning streak and showcasing all aspects of MMA. On the regional scene, we saw him utilize a grapple-heavy approach, nullifying opponents on the ground and looking for submissions or TKOs. In the UFC, through his first 3 fights, he mainly showcased a distance striking style, trying to keep his range, utilizes kicks up the middle and 1-2s down the pipe. But in his last matchup, he was forced to clinch and grapple a little bit more than he should have against Joanderson Brito, and I thought he just won that fight ever so slightly. I thought Brito earned the win through the first 2 rounds, but the judges saw otherwise and they gave the round 3, which was clearly Gomis's round, but round 1, which he got some control in, but not a whole lot of damage. I thought Brito was able to get that damage back with the amount of strikes that he landed in the last minute of that first round. But regardless, Gomis still on a winning streak, still finding ways to just inch out some of these wins, even the one over Francis Marshall. He can strike, he can grapple, he can clinch, but I'm kind of surprised he's as big of a favorite here as he is against Haider Amil. Amil is the fighter that we've been looking to fade Gomis with. This is a guy that's going to go for the grappling or at least push the pressure immediately. And as long as he doesn't leave his chin on the center line for Gomis to counter effectively and kind of thwart the forward pressure of Amil with straight shots down the pipe, Amil should be able to put that pressure on him, put that pace on him, put him through the grind, push him up against the cage, drag him to the ground. And even though Gomis might have moments of success with his own clinch and control, Amil is a guy that does not give up position for an extended period of time. He is always looking for ways to quickly get back to his feet, disrupt the base of his opponents, looking for scrambles, looking for reversals, and I think that pace and pressure is going to cause Gomis a ton of trouble here. Amil will have the cardio advantage as well. I think he's really going to put it on Gomis here, and that will allow him to grind this fight out or pick up a late finish here in the 3rd round. I love Amil as the underdog here. Again, kind of surprised he's at this plus 170 line. Maybe he takes some action during fight week, but as of Sunday before the fights, this is a great spot at plus 170 to shoot on Haider Amil. All right, next up, heavyweights throwing down as we have Austin Lane coming in at plus 285 going up against Mario Pinto, who comes in at minus 350. Now, starting off on Austin Lane, he was able to stop his 2-fight losing streak by picking up a win over Robelis Despain in the most anti-Robelis Despain way possible. He was able to gather 10 minutes of control time over 15 minutes of fight time. The second round, not as much control, but it was clear the grinding of the first round really slowed down the Cuban striker, allowing Lane to really just pick his spots and eventually get back to the grappling in the 3rd round. Lane has some decent power of his own. I believe he comes from a football background, very physical, very athletic, but I think you see in these fights where he's getting knocked out that guys that are better mixed martial artists will be able to get the better of him. And, Despain arguably is a better martial artist, but not a better mixed martial artist, and that's why Lane was able to pick up the victory that night. Unfortunately for Lane, he's going up against a youngster here, 26-year-old Mario Pinto, who has a clean 9-0 record and has a pretty good strength of schedule, relatively speaking, for the regional heavyweight scene out there. He was able to pick up his UFC contract with a Contender Series victory late last year with that win over Lucas Camacho, putting him out in the 1st round. This is a kid that doesn't often look to take opponents out in terms of searching for knockouts or chasing knockouts, putting himself in bad positions, but rather just letting those knockouts come to him. He's a great counter striker. He has great range, good 1-2s down the pipe, good speed, and his defensive grappling is a very shining aspect of his game because he's often looking to keep fight standing as his opponents are always looking to take him to the ground and try to grind him out because he is such a dangerous striker. And I'm expecting him to use those striking capabilities here to land that big power on Lane. And I think that will eventually translate to a knockout victory for the Portuguese fighter. He trains out of England, but he's also been spending time recently at Extreme Couture alongside fellow Portuguese fighter Manel Kape, who I believe actually claims a different Angola, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong with that, but I know Manel Kape has a connection and a tie to Portugal, hence why him and Mario Pinto seem to be getting along here. Not saying that they're the greatest training partners, considering you're talking about the heaviest weight class and the lowest weight class, but Kape obviously introducing him to the Extreme Couture guys and helping him out in that aspect of his game. Look for Pinto to really put the pressure on Lane here, stop the takedowns that are coming his way, and eventually land that big shot to put Lane away. Give me Mario Pinto by knockout. All right, lightweights going at it here as we have Nasrat Haqparast coming in at plus 230, going up against the rolling and steaming Esteban Ribovics, who comes in at minus 270. Now we'll start off on the Nasrat Haqparast side, who's riding a 4-fight winning streak, although his last win against Jared Gordon was a little bit of a controversial decision. I could see how he came down to the third round, and I could ever so slightly see how judges would score that round for Haqparast. Gordon might have been landing a little bit more of the more disciplined and technical counter strikes, but the constant forward pressure and the optics of the big shots that Haqparast was throwing, even if they weren't landing all that clean, may have played into Haqparast actually ending up winning that fight. The Haqparast normally showcases an ironclad chin, which has helped him through some sticky situations in the past, but it's really his striking style, throwing in heavy combinations, utilizing that just power and ability to generate just thudding shots. And it's kind of surprising that he only has 2 knockout wins through his 9 UFC fights, or through his 9 UFC wins, considering the type of striking style he brings to the table. But a lot of that has to do with him just staying within himself and just being confident in the shots that he throws and just not throwing all that much power so he can go 15 minutes if that's what's required of him. If the knockout shows itself like it did against Jamie Mullarkey, he'll take it. But he's also confident to just go out there and outstrike guys like he did against Landon Quinones and John McDessie recently. So I like Haqparast's style. It's still very effective, and he's only 29 years old. Now he's going up against Esteban Ribovics, who's coming off a Fight of the Year contender last time around at Sphere at UFC 306 as he pulled off the upset against Mexican fighter Daniel Zellhuber. Ribovics, again, very back and forth fight. Scorecards were all over the place. Both guys having tremendous success, but I think a lot of people were surprised at the amount of success Ribovics was having, especially with hurting Zellhuber as often as he did. In the past, grapplers have been able to get the better of Ribovics, hence why the lone loss on his record is to Loic Radzhabov. But Ribovics, nasty striker, good combinations, good Muay Thai, improving grappling. His submission game is really improving as well. But I'm kind of surprised he's as big of a favorite here as he is against Haqparast. Haqparast is the guy that used to be the heavy favorite in most of his matchups, but for all of a sudden, I think after Ribovics had that standout performance he had against Zellhuber, now everybody's on the Ribovics side of things. I think Haqparast is the technically superior striker here. I think Ribovics is a little bit more dangerous in terms of getting his power going and being a threat in terms of finishing guys. But if he's unable to finish Haqparast here, Haqparast is going to make this a very competitive fight. I think he can land his straights down the pipe. I think he can utilize that 3-inch reach advantage to really make Ribovics pay anytime he tries to cross the pocket. Both guys training out of stellar gyms. Obviously, Haqparast would TriStar, Ribovics with Killcliff FC. But he's also been splitting time at the UFC PI, it seems. But I'm going to go with the underdog here. I'm going to go with Haqparast. I'm kind of surprised the public is jumping off him so quickly here. It would not surprise me if the plus 230 line ends up coming down during fight week because people start to notice that. But again, Ribovics obviously provides some threat because of the power that he throws with. But again, Haqparast can counter him effectively, maybe land some power shots of his own that could turn the tide of this matchup. But at plus 230, sign me up for Haqparast to give me a classic Haqparast performance to win this fight by decision. All right, co-main event on tap here now as we have Cody Brundage coming in at plus 155 for this middleweight matchup, going up against Julian, the Cuban Missile Crisis Marquez, who comes in at minus 180. Now, I'll start off on the Brundage side of things, who's coming off a classic Brundage performance, going to a no contest against Abdul Razak Al Hassan in a fight where it seemed like he was dead to rights and pretty much just out of there, but bearing his head as he often does, looking for takedowns, trying to stay out of trouble, which allowed a lot of the shots that Al Hassan was trying to get some ground and pound finishing shots in with, a lot of those landing to the back of the head of Brundage, which causes stoppage to the fight and the no contest. Luckily for Al Hassan, he didn't have to take a DQ loss the way Jacob Malkoun did a couple fights back for Brundage, where he found himself in a similar situation. Now, Brundage, again, he brings the chaos often, but not the type of fighter a lot of people expected him to be, especially with how highly touted his wrestling was. Again, he made a solid account of himself, even in that loss at UFC 300 to Bo Nickel, but we know that he's just not of that level. He has big power in his hands. He has the nasty guillotine if he can catch guys in it early. And just the chaotic nature of his style makes him live in some fights, just as we saw against Zachary Reese. But I just don't think he really has what it takes to get into the rankings or even become somewhat of a contender. Now, he goes up against Julian Marquez, who's looking to buck a 3-fight losing streak. The last time he was able to pick up a victory was over Sam Alvey, I believe 4 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. But Marquez, again, a guy that's kind of struggling because of the durability issues we've seen of him as of late. Gregory Rodriguez put him away. He had a great first round against Marc-Andre Barriault, but then eventually got put away in the second round. And then Zachary Reese was able to knock him out in just seconds, 20 seconds if I'm not mistaken, quickly landing an uppercut, couple ground and pound shots, and putting Marquez away. Marquez has big power of his own. He has a sneaky front choke game as well, just as we saw when he submitted Maki Pitolo and Sam Alvey. He's a decent fighter. He was a guy that was splitting time between Glory MMA when James Krause was still the coach over there, as well as Factory X. And that's where I think the interesting aspect of this fight comes into play is that Cody Brundage is a diehard Factory Xer. So these guys were former training partners. But I believe as of October 2023, I could be off on that number, or it's been close to a year now at least, that Julian Marquez moved to Arizona and has been training at the MMA lab and getting a little bit more catered training towards his style. It didn't work out in the Zachary Reese fight. Didn't have enough time to really showcase some of the new wrinkles he may have picked up down there in Arizona. But I find it interesting that he's taken this Cody Brundage fight, considering they may have had some sort of relationship or friendship when they were both Factory X fighters. I don't think it was a long and tenured relationship at all. I think it was more so whenever Marquez would go up to Factory X. But this kind of reminds me of when JJ Aldrich took a short notice fight against Montana De La Rosa, as they were former training partners in Denver for a couple of training camps, and Aldrich jumped on the opportunity right away to take that short notice opportunity, and we saw her pull off the upset against De La Rosa that night. Now Marquez, maybe he felt something in their training and their sparring that he's like, you know what, I'll take this short notice opportunity, risk the fact that I might go on a 4-fight losing streak, but I have confidence that I've got the better of this guy in training camp, and that might be enough for me to pull off the victory here. If Marquez was the underdog, maybe I would consider taking a shot on him here. The under 1.5, which currently sits around even money. Again, early in the week, it might take some heavy action, but I'd take that up to minus 150 as I expect these guys to throw down almost immediately. I'm going to lean Marquez here. I don't like the minus 180 because of the possible durability issues he might have, and we know Brundage could land with some big power, but I'm going to go Marquez here. I think he just feels something that he can defeat Brundage with. I think it happens under 1.5 rounds, which is where my action will likely be for this matchup, but I'm going to go Marquez. Marquez inside the distance, maybe club and sub or just club and drum. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to go under 1.5 as my favorite spot, with Marquez winning inside the distance. All right, that brings us to our flyweight headliner between Manel Kape coming in at minus 230, going up against Asu Almabayev, who's currently riding a 17-fight winning streak and had some changes in opponents, but taking full advantage of this opportunity to fight another headliner, Manel Kape, and a guy that could potentially get him closer to a title shot sooner than later. Now, Manel Kape, crazy run for this guy, in terms of the amount of fights that he's had canceled on him compared to the fights that he's actually had in the UFC. I believe he has had more fights canceled than he actually competed in. So very unfortunate for him, and unfortunate circumstances that he's gone up against. But last time around, when he stepped foot in the cage against Bruno Silva, battered him for 2.5 rounds before he eventually knocked him out in the third. And that just goes to show one of the better performances that Kape is capable of. He utilizes a ton of footwork, a ton of speed, a ton of power. I just wish he would be a little bit more higher output, but I think a lot of that has to do with him timing his shots and being a little bit more accurate rather than just throwing volume for the sake of throwing volume. Takedown defense obviously improved. That allows him to keep fights upright and then just stick to his striking style. And I think he's going to have to utilize that effectively here against Almabayev, who's going to be looking to take fights to the ground and just try to grind opponents out. Now, against Nicolau, Almabayev was forced to strike a little bit longer than he was hoping for. First round, just edging out Nicolau because he had the threat of the takedown. He went for a couple of takedowns, couldn't complete them. Nicolau picked up some confidence in the second round, was able to get some good work there. And then in the third round, luckily, Almabayev hurts Nicolau badly and then is able to enjoy control time for the last 4 minutes of that third round and ends up winning that fight on the scorecards. But as we're seeing, as Almabayev starts taking steps up in competition, his wrestling is not working all that well for him. And that could be the issue here against Kape. Now, Almabayev has passable striking. I'm not saying he's a complete slouch there, but he needs that threat of the takedown or the success of the takedown to have uber success or at least start to fuel some of the striking in his game. But he's going to be up against it here against a faster and more powerful Kape. And I think we'll see Kape showcase that takedown defense, and I think he'll be able to land those big shots on Almabayev. And I don't think he'll 100% be able to knock Almabayev out. I think he hurts him multiple times. I think he maybe gets a couple knockdowns here. And then when he tries to follow up with some ground and pound, I think Almabayev will initiate some scrambles, which will keep him alive. But I think unless Kape can put him out clean, I think this fight actually ends up going the full 25 minutes. And Kape obviously first 25-minute fight of his UFC career, or at least first one that he'll... first one of his UFC career. But I think his style will allow him to be effective over 25 minutes, land more effective strikes, land some knockdowns. But ultimately, I think Kape wins this fight on the scorecards. There you guys go. UFC Vegas 103 full card breakdown for you guys. Nice and early on a Sunday. Hope to stick with the schedule moving forward. Stay tuned for the next one on next Sunday. Otherwise, I'll see you guys tomorrow, Monday, for the top 3 lock of the night candidates. See you guys then. Peace.